is Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who knows more about the military than most people you hear spouting off opinions about it. Colonel Macgregor is a West Point graduate who spent his career in the United States Army. Colonel, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Judging Freedom.
Great to see you.
So when you were here last, which was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I asked you, what do the nationalists, the globalists, the people who run the United States Department of State and their like-minded colleagues in Europe really want out of the Russia-Ukraine war? Without skipping a beat, you said regime change in Moscow. And I thought, well, all right, maybe Doug is onto something, but nobody else is saying this. A week later, the president of the United States lets it slip out of his mouth in a major address that broadcast internationally that he's giving to American troops in Poland. Putin has to go. And just last Sunday, Jake Sullivan, who's the president's national security advisor, told Jonathan Karl on ABC News what we really expect out of this is a diminished Russian state and a diminished Russian government, whatever that means. Well, we know what it means because you put your finger on it. Are you surprised that the president made this slip? Are you surprised that Jake Sullivan, who rarely slips up on anything, said this? And are we seeing more evidence of it than we saw when you made your prediction nearly a month ago?
Well, Judge, it's wishful thinking, obviously, because the regime in Moscow is not going to change. In fact, I think we're much more likely to see Putin in charge in a couple of years than we are to see Biden in charge. So it's entirely wishful thinking. It's fantastic. If you look at the news today, the ruble is actually stronger now than it was before the Russian intervention in Ukraine. And the so-called sanctions have done nothing to reduce Russia's income from the exportation of energy to Europe. So on the whole, I'd say, yeah, I'm not surprised about the regime change admission, but it's utter nonsense. It's fanciful. It's not going to happen. The great fear I have at this point is that we will insist on waging proxy war using whatever is left of the Ukrainians from Poland. And that's dangerous because that could potentially pull the Poles into this destructive mess. I just don't see anything good coming out of it because we're not prepared to step forward and say enough's enough damage, enough blood's being spilled. Let's work out some sort of agreement with which everybody can live. In other words, we're not really looking for an end to the conflict. We would prefer, I'm afraid, to see it go on and perpetually, frankly, to do as much damage as possible, not just to Russia, but to everybody in Eastern Europe. It's tragic.
You used the word fanciful. Is it not also fanciful for the American globalist establishment? I'll use that term to apply to Secretary of State Blinken, Security Advisor Sullivan, and their like-minded folks in the law enforcement, intelligence, military, State Department, those people. Is it not fanciful for them to expect that Russia will be damaged over this? Do they really think that Putin will lose his job because public opinion is upset at seeing Russian body bags?
Well, I've spent time talking to people on the ground over there to the extent that I'm able. And more interestingly, within the last few days, I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk to some individuals who are recently returned from Russia, Ukraine, Poland. And they've all told me the same thing, that it's not just a question of Putin's approval rating, which is up in the mid 80% range. Ooh. It's more than that. The recruiting stations for the Russian army are chock full. People are volunteering to fight in Ukraine. The support for him and for his policy inside Russia is overwhelming. So I think that's one reason why it's all fanciful. The other reason is very simply this. Once you move past Europe, particularly Western Europe and North America, the rest of the world is largely aligning with Russia and its strategic partner, China, and increasingly now also India. So you're talking about the rest of the world that doesn't see the urgency under any circumstances to damage Russia.
You know, it's funny you mention India, Colonel, because I've noticed that President Biden seems to be spending a lot of time with Prime Minister Modi of India as recently as yesterday. What is he offering him, and what does he want from him?
I don't know. I think what he'd like him to do is obviously join this anti-Russian crusade that the Biden administration wants to lead on the economic and ostensibly on every level. And I don't see that happening. India has a long-term relationship with Russia that goes all the way back to its declaration of independence. They have good relations. They buy each other's equipment. They buy each other's commodities. I see no evidence that we are going to drag India into this anti-Russian coalition. By the way, we've had no success dragging India into this anti-Chinese coalition.
What do you think General Mark Milley, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is saying to the president?
Gosh, there isn't going to be a lot of daylight between General Milley and Secretary of State Blinken. Obviously, he's an ideological fellow traveler. He's firmly in the globalist camp.
Okay, does the military? This is almost unthinkable, but I have to ask you: does the military, the U.S. military, want to get involved? In other words, is General Milley saying, "Hey, Mr. President, give us a couple of weeks and this will be over"? Something as absurd as that.
No, I don't see much evidence for that. In fact, Milley, if anything, is very concerned about not becoming involved in a direct confrontation with the Russians because he knows that we're not really prepared for it. Everyone thinks in terms of a one-off battle that you might have. But the truth is that when you engage a great power like Russia, you're signing on for a long-term conflict that you may not win. So I think quite clearly Milley is not arguing for that. I think he's trying to reassure the president that things are better than they are inside the military. That's pretty obvious, at least based on the statements that he and Lloyd Austin make publicly. But beyond that, no, I think he's probably advising the president, Mr. President, we just need to stay the course. I think he's probably also a supporter of this proxy war idea, the notion that we can send other people to die for us.